So this video is about making a ball mill, but I've already made this mill and I'm putting the video together, and I realized it would be helpful in the beginning to give you an idea of what we're going for. So the reason you want a ball mill is to be able to take ceramic or steel balls along with something you want to grind up and water, and you close it up and you let it tumble like a rock tumbler for as long as it needs overnight. And I want to use it specifically for making glazes with things like granite dust, and I want to be able to take backyard clay that I've cleaned and harvested and dried and mill that down to a fine consistency, as well as you've seen my videos on eggshells and using wood ash. All these things would be nice to be able to grind up into something that is nice and fine and smooth. So first thing I need to do is make a jar with a lid, and then we'll make the balls and we'll put this little drive thing on and we'll go through it. But that's what a ball mill is, and I'll show you how I made it. So 5 pounds, 12 ounces, just because that's about what it worked out to be, no particular reason. I need to make sure that this rim sticks out further than the wall, because the plan is to have it tipped, and this rim is what's eventually going to ride on the wheel head while it's in use. So now we just need to let them stiffen up and get to trimming them. So I want to get a knob, but I want it to be really low in there. I don't want it to hang out too much, and we'll see when it's done why that's probably a good idea. But I'm nervous that I don't have quite the material I want. I want it to have a pretty consistently thick body. So this is pretty stiff clay. I might have missed the opportunity, but I'm going to take the end of this tool handle here and I'm going to wet it, and we're going to wet this right here, and I'm going to try to push down to see if I can get some of that without having to trim it. We'll see. It may not work. I'm finding that using my finger actually is a little more controllable, because I don't want to displace the clay out. I want to get the clay to move down. Well, the whole thing is getting dropping in a little bit more than I wanted, but that's okay. If I can't get it, then I'll hollow it out and I'll add a little finger pull. In fact, that might be what I want to do here. Got a little ball of clay, put a little handle on here. Alright, good enough. Let that stiffen up and I'll probably come back and clean it with a sponge. I'm going to cut a recess in the foot so I have an opportunity to attach something to the base to hold this. And when I put that recess in, I really don't want to have it off center from the body, because when this thing is turning over, when it's running, it'll be really obvious. I really want a nice round radius on this because it's going to lessen our chances of chipping it when we set it down and pick it up and set it down on counters and whatnot. Just using my fingers to rub it in. Now to bisque fire. So here's the ball mill out of the bisque fire. You can see I made 3 lids, and I'm glad I did. The one that I showed you, my trimming process, developed a pretty serious crack, or series of cracks, and I'm sure that was from me trying to wet and dent down this area with the handle of the tool. So that was a mistake, and I should have known better. I was pushing pretty firmly, so it doesn't surprise me this cracked. But I made 2 others, and I'll show you. It's always good to make extras. But I made 2. I made one that fits quite loosely. And of course, you never know for sure exactly how it's going to fit, but I wanted something thick enough that I could put like a rubber band or some sort of rubber on this, because as this sits on its side, we'll have media and, you know, glaze or water in it, and it'll be turning around. I don't know if this lid, it's not intended to hold the water in, it's intended more for humidity control, maybe minor splashing, but I don't want it grinding around. So I made one lid a little loose, and then I made a second one really nice and tight. So you can see this one actually, I went ahead right before I threw this in the to fire the bisque. I took a piece of sandpaper and I sanded this mouth open just enough to get a comfortable fit. So I think that's going to be the winner. So next up, I'm going to leave the inside raw, but I do want to glaze the outside of the lids, the lip, and the outside of the body. I'll wipe off a spot for the kiln shelf. But that's my next step. I'm going to go ahead and get this glazed and get it fired. Well, here it is out of the glaze. Looks nice. No surprises, with one exception. The lid that I showed that fits so well, I had chosen not to fire it on there. I was just worried, you know, it's so low profile that if it's stuck, I didn't even know if I had a good angle to get in there and whack it with a hammer, so I fired it separately. It also, I was doing some red iron oxide tests next to it, and they kind of sputtered. So, not that I really care, but, and I want this to fit. So I'll have to do a little bit of wet sanding on the inside of the mouth and see, I mean, it's really, really close. We'll sand that open and get that fixed. Okay, so I think I want about 20 or 30 little balls, and to be consistent I'm going to use a ruler, cut them up into 1/2-inch pieces, and roll them in my hand. I actually don't care if they're perfectly round, as long as they're all about the same shape. It's pretty common to use several different sizes, maybe 3 different size balls, because when they kind of fit together, the smaller ones can go in between. But in this case, I'm just going to make uniform balls. We're going to roll them up, fire them, and I can always come back and make different sizes if I feel like I need to, or if it's not working right. That's what I'm going to do, right there. Okay, well, I'm going to keep making some more. I'd rather have extras than find out that I needed a bit more, and I'll come right back to you. So there you are, 38 1/2-inch round balls. And I'm going to let these dry up, and we'll throw them in the kiln tomorrow and get these things going. Okay, so I've rounded up some donor parts to make the base for the ball mill, and you can see the O-ring. It isn't glued on at this point. I'll be gluing that on and showing you that later, but I have a piece of steel. I'll turn this down so it fits into one of the lug holes in this old disc brake, and on the other end we're going to have an assembly for adjustment and weld on something like this ball bearing. that will allow this to pivot. So that's the idea. Well, I took this outside, got the rust off, cut that section of pipe I needed, and I got most of the old paint off with a wire brush. So next step is to weld this nut onto the top so that this will be able to screw in, and then we can use this other nut as kind of a jam nut to lock in our settings. So we'll get that welded up. Now I'm going to take this and fill in those gaps with a wire feed welder. I can lay a lot more material quickly and come right back to you. Doesn't really matter. Fingerprints of the potter maybe. And I went ahead and cut this bolt and took the threaded part that we're going to use and took it on the wheel and on the wire wheel and cleaned that up. Nice. So I'm going to put this in a lathe and we're going to turn this down a tiny bit, and I'll show you how we're going to make the pieces that are going to make up the top. But first, let's take this to the lathe and turn this down so it can slip up there a little bit and I can get this welded on. Before I can decide on where to cut this off, I need to finish building the top section, and that means doing all the little bits that go between this ball and this screw. And the first thing I need is like a head on this, a 1-inch piece of steel. Doesn't need to be super deep like a really thick washer, but I'm gonna slice off a bit of this, go to the lathe, poke a hole, and we're going to put this in a lathe and turn this down just a little bit. It's a little bigger than 1/2 inch, and I want to make sure I take off any galvanization on this so I can slip it in the hole, tack weld it, and then I'll show you what we're going to do from there. So here's what we have. I cut off the end of that piece of steel and kind of broke the edges, and of course we have the bolt that we turned the shoulder down on, and they fit nicely together. And I'm just going to get up underneath here with the TIG welder and give it 2 or 3 little tacks. It really doesn't need much, but here's the idea. Where I'm going with this may not necessarily be obvious at first. So as I showed you, I like this idea of having a ball with this being mounted to the bottom of our mill, and I should have some angle choices in where it rides on the wheel. But in reality, the best way to install this would be, see if I can show you, at a slight angle. At a slight angle so that I can lean it down even further and still have plenty of this ball up in the bearing race. It'll support it better. So what's this for, you might be wondering? Well, you know, we're going to, in one way or the other, I'm going to have a ball kind of floating up here. But I'd like to be able to have this be able to tip up and slide down further and slide down onto here. Because when it slides, that'll kind of lock it in an upright position. And if I want, I can kind of slip it up, rotate it on the ball, and the rim will ride on the wheel, you know, as long as I need it to. So that's why I have this, and that's why that size is exactly sized to fit inside that race. Now I'm going to chop it and grind it till it it has just a little stub at the right angle that I can weld on here. Okay, so we have the ball chopped off, have it ground at an angle, taking my measurements. It looks like everything is going to be in the right spot. So I'm just going to set it up here to weld. And we'll tack it and we'll check it and then we'll weld it on for real. Well, I wanted to point something out. Because we took the time to give that angulation to the post, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do this, but it allows it to sit deep enough inside where I can use the grub screws that were part of the bearing and tighten them just until the ball does not come out. And now it's locked on. And so even I was a little worried, you know, this thing could walk off. You know, I'm going to turn it on, let it run overnight. It would be a bummer to see it smashed on the floor just because it popped off the ball, even though I don't think that's likely. But I can go ahead and keep an Allen wrench with the tool and maybe a magnet somewhere on the base of the machine and give it a half a turn and not worry about it falling off. Okay, it's all assembled. I've laid it out. I'm looking for 22 inches minus some for the thickness of the drum. And so I have my marks here. That's where the shoulder will be, and I'm going to cut it off here, and this little bit is going to go into the hole. So that's the plan. Let me go chop this off. Well, after a quick trip to the bandsaw and then to the metal lathe again, we have that turned down with a nice flat shoulder, so it'll fit just like that. Now this is a cast iron rotor and this is mild steel, so I'm not going to attempt to weld these two metals together. I know there are ways, but instead this thing is going to stick through the back. So I'm just going to take the TIG torch to that and I'm going to melt that down into a mushroom, and it will grab that disc really strong. So I'll do that now. That should last a long time. Well, there it is, all nice and tight. And all I have to do is give it a good wipe down and a coat of paint, and we can get on to the rest of it. I do want to go ahead and get a coat of paint on this as well. I'm going to paint it white. You can see I've already really scraped up the bottom, so we'll get a good epoxy attachment. And I'm going to use these 4 holes because I would like to be able to take this off and, you know, set it on the glaze bench. So I'm going to make 4 little wooden, probably oak, because they're strong, but 4 little short legs that are just taller than this, so that when we take it off, we can set it down. Okay, next step, I need to get some epoxy mixed up, because I'd like to get this bearing glued and curing. And I use the scale not because I'm going for a particular amount, but more so I can ensure that the second part is exactly the same amount. The paint is still tacky, but I'm going to wait for this to dry up. I might as well get the glue drying at the same time. And I've used a pencil to make a mark on the foot. So this is what we're going for, right around the edge and a little bit in on the corners. Okay, I think that looks good. Let's get this set down. I'll let that dry for at least a day. We'll come back to it. Okay, so the bearing is nice and dried, glued onto the bottom, and now I want to get this O-ring installed. And I've made some little feet I want to glue in as well. Off camera, went to the wood lathe. Okay, so I'm just going to clean this O-ring. I don't think I need to take sandpaper to it or anything like that. I just want to get a fine amount of this epoxy. Get a Q-tip. This epoxy is really strong, but it takes a little time to set up, and it'll run. It'll give me little drips, and I just don't want drips. Okay. Looks like I've made it all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I wipe off any extra glue that made it on the edge. I put this thing on and off 4 or 5 times off camera, and it never gave me trouble. But the moment I put glue on it, I'm trying to be careful, it started to be a bit of a pill. Come on, here we go. So I'll let that dry up, but while I have the glue, I want to install these little feet. Here's what they look like. And I don't really need a whole bunch of epoxy, because they fit fairly snug. Okay, so there we go. And once this is all nice and dried, I'm going to take it to the belt sander and we'll just kiss it off to make sure that they're all level so that when you set it on the counter it doesn't rock too bad. Okay, so first chance to dry run. I have the media balls out of the glaze kiln. I'm going to just put some water in here, and I'm going to let this run overnight, and I'm going to see if when I pour the water out, is it milky? So I want to point out I did add one thing. I wasn't sure whether or not this was going to want to possibly walk off, so I did add a little, found one more nut that matched and added a little rod. It's not touching, but in case this thing jams up or walks off, it won't fall to the ground. Well, I left it run overnight. Wasn't sure when I came in this morning if this was going to be on the floor for some reason, but it's running really good. You can definitely see where it's leaving a black rubber mark on the wheel head. My safety bar here ended up not really being needed, because that's the one thing I wanted to look at, was did it close the gap and start rubbing on this, meaning that this assembly shifted. But alright, let me stop it and get it out, and let's take a look at what is left inside. Well, milky. The balls are really smooth looking. So it is kind of what I expected to see on the first run. What my hope though is that if I continue to do this night after night, maybe the second or third time, it wouldn't be so milky. If it continues to be milky, that it means that these are going to continue to wear down, and then I need to look at how much settles out of this foggy water, and can I deal with that additional amount of additive to whatever I'm milling. Okay, so this is after 2 days of letting it settle out, and there's definitely a discernible line on the bottom. It's interesting though, it's still cloudy, and I don't know why. I'm going to set you right here. It's almost like there's just a thin snowdrift up the wall. It's not like it's actually that deep. Because when I saw that amount, I thought, oh my gosh, that's a lot. I mean, I expect a certain amount from the first few runs breaking it in, but if it's regularly putting out, you know, that thickness of sediment in that kind of volume, that's a lot. That's too much. Maybe I'd have to think about changing my clay body, but it doesn't appear as though it's that thick. It actually is just a tiny little thin skim along the bottom, and it just went up the walls a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the video here. We'll have a part 2 where I make some more ceramic balls and try grinding some materials. But I hope you enjoyed. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you think. Thanks again.